Hello, welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for another hour power here on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, iTunes, and with video here on YouTube. Hey, everybody. Okay, so this week we are going to talk about current events and Black Lives Matter and Evergreen State College, and some events that went on there that I believe were a precursor to, sort of pilot program, beta testing, whatever you want to call it, for what's going on now across the United States. And, if you have the idea that all that's happening right now is an organic movement of people that suddenly sprung up and we're all about equal rights for everybody and what's the problem, you got a wrong view of what's happening right now. I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm sorry to say it with such certainty, but there is more going on under the surface here, okay? And this podcast is an effort to try to talk about some of what's going on under the surface. And the reason that I am dedicating time on my channel as a critical thinker and ex-cult member to talk about this is because I see, based on my education and background and experience, red flags going on right now, going up all over the United States. Those red flags have to do with something called critical race theory, or critical theory. And I've had Dr. James Lindsay on my show to discuss that in detail. You can please refer to those episodes because they are important. It is a difficult topic to talk about. It's not easy. I can't meme this. I can't just throw up some images and some snarky comments and get across the level of duplicity involved with some of this. So that's why podcasting is such a great platform. And that's why this week I've asked Benjamin Boyce onto my show. Hey, Benjamin.
Hey, I was wondering if I was going to make it into the introduction.
Yeah, no, I'm getting you there. I just gotta, you want to set things up and set the tone for all of it, because this is difficult and people are really, really ready to just they're loaded, man. They got the shotgun pointed at you, and they're ready to come out with the labels and just dismiss everything you have to say out of hand because you're pushing back somehow. And pushing back doesn't mean that you or I are in favor of prejudicial behavior towards minorities or segregation or pay gaps or let's beat on people because of their skin color. I'm not for any of that stuff. And I know my viewers know that about me. And I want them to know that about you right out of the gates, because this isn't about the supremacy of the white person is an inherent, organic, natural thing. And why are these people being so uppity? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're talking about an underpinning to this movement that is a dangerous underpinning that has ideas that are not good ideas. Equal rights are good ideas. Getting laws straight so that cops aren't murdering people of color is a good idea. Reforming the police so they're not abusive toward any citizens is a good idea. Some of these ideas involved with critical race theory are not. So I asked Benjamin onto my channel today because he was a student of Evergreen State College in Washington, where this whole thing blew up. And he lived through it, and he put a channel together and he's documented this, and it is amazing, infuriating, outraging, and enlightening at the same time. So Benjamin, first off, why don't you, for my audience, now that I've described you and all of this, why don't you tell them what you're about?
Well, like you said, I want to frame it in terms of James Lindsay's work and Mike Nina as well. They've been guests on my channel. And James Lindsay lays out, along with Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian, a lot of the theory and the academic origins of these ideas that go under the name of capital T theory. What you see with Evergreen is practice. And my documentary was based on hours and hours of footage of student protesters who took over the campus, who shut down classrooms, who berated the administration, took people hostage, and just acted completely outrageously. And there's no way that I can do it justice by just talking about it. Like the way that they're acting is so over the top that it's riveting stuff. And so I put all of that footage together and married it with footage from the lectures, the seminars, the orientations that the Evergreen State College was using to teach these ideas to the students. Now, I don't know the whole correlation causation metric of this, but I put the footage together in such a way that I think it's pretty plausible that there are a certain set of ideas that led to the collapse of this community of about 4,000 people that was taken over by about 200 maybe at most, but at the core of that is probably like 30 people really took over the campus and caused the disaster that is now basically destroyed Evergreen at this point. Like their enrollment has tanked, and now that the COVID-19 has come through, like they're in really dire straits because it's become synonymous not with social justice activism, but the worst possible version of social justice activism. So I started my channel because I was a student of Evergreen. I was there on the time, and I saw, one, that the campus, you were not allowed to speak. I had professors tell me, like, I've never seen such a chilling effect on discourse. Like, you can't talk to anybody at this point. So I saw that I couldn't speak, nobody could speak on campus. And then I saw that everybody was talking about this footage on the internet. And I wanted to start to bridge the gap between what people saw and what was actually going on under the scenes. And so I put together a long form, just kind of a rambly kind of draft of videos called Expose Evergreen. That's about 120 episodes of me just going through all these different facets. But I've distilled all of that down into a 24 episode series. And the episodes are between 20 minutes and 30 minutes each. There's probably a couple that are longer than that, but they're short bite-sized chunks that goes through and lays out chronologically what happened, and then ideologically how the ideas stacked up and interrelated with the behaviors.
Nice. And I'll tell you guys, if you haven't seen or heard of Benjamin's channel, please subscribe to it. Check it out. He puts this stuff together in the same way I've put a lot of stuff about Scientology together. You take a very difficult to talk about, difficult to understand, weighty set of ideas and mechanisms and methodologies and stuff. And how do you distill that down to a few memes? Well, you can't. You got to actually walk through it. In order to understand it, you got to take a little bit of time. You don't have to spend days and weeks and months diving down this rabbit hole. He did a great job showing you in bite-sized videos exactly with their videos, with videos of students and other people who were there. Most of that is what does the talking. It's not you being a talking head. Most of your stuff is just, here it is. And here's how it happened. And here's some little important bits of information. Because you'll find one of the things that I loved about the way that you put it together was you could actually see what happened. And then you could see how the students represented what happened.
Yeah, exactly. They totally lied the whole time.
Oh, my God. I mean, it was a night and day distortion of what happened. The police came and pushed us all around and, armed there, rah, rah, rah. And I feel unsafe here. And I was like having a real hard time listening to students talking about how unsafe they felt while they were sitting there talking to the president of the college while having pizza, and he's acquiescing to their every demand.
Yeah. They were dictating to him who to fire, who to hire, who's a good person, who's a bad person. And he's like, oh, I know, free speech. He apologized. The president actually apologized for free speech. Like, yeah, we kind of have to have free speech, but if they don't get our training, then we can get rid of them.
That's right. And that's how they got rid of Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Heyer, yeah?
They got rid of them through legal proceedings. Like there was a settlement, a tort claim. There's layers to the story that are kind of like, just storytelling of how this thing happened. But the core of it is that there's a set of ideas that basically are very, very identical to the ideas that I bet a lot of you, speaking to the audience here, will encounter. If you haven't already encountered, you're going to encounter it at your church, if you go to church, at your job, at any sort of institution, any sort of large institution, or even your book clubs, where you're all going to be reading this anti-racist doctrine by Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi. And those ideas are the bedrock of the cultural revolution that happened at Evergreen. And since this month, actually, so I spent like the last 3 years, because the protest happened in 2017. This month has been interesting because I've been basically defending my dissertation. I put it all together. I have a couple more episodes to put together. I kind of lost. It's a lot of work, but I put it all together, and now it's happening in America at large. Now, it used to be just little pockets, like the community, the quilting community went through this, or some little business over here, some school over there. Now it's just going to rapidly pop up. And now I'm trying to get out the word and criticize this stuff and provide people ways of criticizing this stuff that's specifically designed to be uncriticizable.
Right. And it's crafty stuff. And you see it actually play out on social media. Because there's very circular logic going on. There's double binds contained within this material. So it's sort of like you can't be right, or you can't navigate through this without having to agree with every single part of this, of what is actually ultimately a racially dividing ideology, which sort of disguises itself as a movement for civil rights and social equality. They use equity. They can't even use the word equality. It's changed to equity. And the wording and the language of this is super important. This is Orwellian level redefinition of terms and propaganda. This is not small, lightweight stuff. This has been decades in the making. Mm-hmm. They have had every argument thrown at them and have figured out how to rework the argument in the same way Scientology could. Mm. And it's if you get into that world, you can't figure your way out of it, because all the traps are laid to keep you in it. And keep you, by the way, especially if you're a white person, but really pretty much anybody, you have to succumb to this. You have to give over to it. You have to give yourself to it. And that is where it becomes religious.
I would add that you brought up race, and this is a racial discussion, but actually, if you look at what happens, and you don't see this often, but if you are what they call a person of color or a black person, and you speak out against this, they will actually treat you worse than they treat the white person that goes against this, right? You're worse than a racist. You're a race traitor in this stuff. So it's yeah. And it's really dangerous stuff. And you see that playing out in high schoolers and college folk. They bring it to the absolute conclusion, right? Us adults can probably kind of put up with the passive aggressive brain fuckery, and a certain amount of us will turn into zealots. Most of us will actually shrug it off. But when it becomes the modus operandi of a group of young people who don't have that perspective, they take it to the limit, and they do much more damage. They do a lot of personal harm, right? They go after, we've seen them go after and ruin careers, but I think they're going to start ruining each other's lives and do a lot of exiling, which will lead to probably some very dire consequences for individuals who don't have the stomach to just be exiled for saying the wrong thing or not saying the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. The us versus them aspect of this is intense. Yeah. Once you start really getting below the surface, which all of us can agree with, and I'm going to analogize that to Scientology. Surface level looks great. It's all wonderful. It's all good, but you get into it, it's not so great. There's, because this started at a college, I am interested in the indoctrination versus education aspect of it, which is experienced. Yeah. And let me, clarify, just for you. I think I've said this before, but I look at indoctrination as a way of getting information across to somebody in such a way that they can't really question it. Now, whether that's with little kids who just simply don't have the ability to question, or adults who are put under social pressure or job pressure, or, if you don't accept this, you're going to lose your job. Well, now you have to accept it. Now you're put in a position where it's an either or. And when that is how information is imparted to you, I call that indoctrination, because there's no power of choice involved in whether you can accept or receive or critically think about the information. Yeah. Versus what I call education, which is where, no, there's conversations, there's debate, there's back and forth. I don't quite totally understand that. Can you explain that in some other way? And then, like you're really engaging with the material and diving deep into it. But there's critical thinking involved. You're able to question it. That's my point of education, is there's a dividing line between feeding information to people and forcing them to take it versus feeding people information and inviting them to take part in it. Yeah. And I think that's where I draw the lines on that. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, in the context of the Evergreen State College, like I said, by the end of it, I didn't know what I could say. So my first few videos, I'm talking and I'm apologizing a lot. I'm sorry, I'm not a racist. I'm just trying to work through this stuff. I'm not a racist. I'm sorry. I'm not a racist. I'm sorry. I got so tired of that. Because it just okay, even if it is true that I am this thing or not this thing, I can't control other people's judgment of me. I need to make content and I need to engage with this material. There's this element of being able to have wiggle room with the ideas, right? It's like, I don't advocate people questioning everything, because that's exhausting. And you can question yourself into loop-de-loops and not actually get anything done.
Yeah, of course.
But if you're ever in an environment when you're not allowed to question, that's when your questions should be front and center. Why can't I say that? Why can't I say this? And a lot of the binds that they do within this ideology, and that they did with Evergreen, was that it preys upon politeness and niceness. And I kind of want to make a racial observation about middle-aged white women being really keen on their reputations being wrapped up with being nice and empathetic. And that's how it actually gets into you. It really exploits empathetic entities and niceness culture, because it shows that you're actually mean. No matter how nice you are, you're mean, right? No matter how much of a good person you are, you're still a racist because you're not being anti-racist. But within the context of the Evergreen State College, they I don't know if it's indoctrinate, but they kind of persuade you to this culture of inclusion, of acceptance, and they center the identity. And the identity markers are that which you pay heed to most of all. You don't misgender somebody. And whatever your opinions on gender fluctuation and gender pronouns are, it's the mode in which they are implemented. And I think Jordan Peterson was just trying to make the point. It's not the gender pronouns, it's the compelling of the gender pronouns. Right. That's one step to get me to just force feed me everything attached to them. And there's a lot attached to those things. There's a lot of assumptions. There's this really, the footage of the Evergreen State College protest has a lot of, or just the whole college has a lot of unintended comedy to it, especially when some of the administrators are speaking, because they're not like the sharpest tools in the shed. And there's this one moment in the orientation that the beginning of the year that ended in like the collapse of civil discourse, where Mimi Kantar or something like that, she says, I don't know if you've ever heard of pronouns, but we're going to show you how pronouns work. And then everybody just says their pronouns, like, well, wait. They're like, oh, okay, you mean pronouns work around here. Like, that's what you mean, how we use pronouns. But no, this is how pronouns work now. And I think like a lot of this stuff is really, you just kind of rap with it and you know what not to say. So you can say all this nonsense stuff as long as you don't say those things that you're not supposed to say. And so you see a lot of people who aren't really good thinkers are really able to just be malleable with this stuff, because it inspires, or it requires the suspension of actual critical thinking of like, I have to get to a conclusion and then test the conclusion.
You have an environment of conformity, of compliance, of demand. And that's the stuff that lights up my red flags, that lights up my red board of like, ronk, 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 there's something wrong here. Mm-hmm. that's not the path to enlightenment. We are never going to have a free, open, tolerant, liberal society through cultic means, through extremist authoritarian measures. That's not how these things work.
There's no checks.
Well, yeah, because you can have a society where everybody's on the same page. That's what North Korea looks like. You want that?
So far as we know.
Well, as far as, when you look at every single person who goes in there and comes out, they're like, that place is weird, because everybody must be, that's as close to 1984 as we get. But that's not the direction that, my only point is not we're going to end up there. My point is that that's a direction you start heading in, and you can have the best intentions. You can have the most wonderful ideals, but you start forcing people into what they can say, what they can think, what they can feel. You start demanding that level of compliance out of people. The word we use to describe that is a cult.
Well, see, the thing is that the professors didn't demand that. They set up the conditions for those demands to be made by the student protesters. There's this really interesting slide in authority where the authority figures, like the proper authority figures, set up the conditions for all of the authority to go into the protesters and to implement right now. We need equity now. We need this person fired right now. And there's little movements towards that. And it was interesting. This episode is actually, I wonder how it has aged now, but there's this point that I made about midway or towards the end of the series, the documentary, where I say something about if the truism holds that if you want to know who's in power, figure out who you can't criticize. Right? That also happens with ideas as well. And there was a sacred idea on the Evergreen campus that was enforced. Like, you cannot criticize this idea. And it was hashtag Black Lives Matter. If any poster went up that said all lives matter, it was removed immediately. There was somebody put a poster up of crime statistics in the Black community. And the vice president of student affairs went around and tore all of those flyers down. Immediately. Like it just shows now whether or not, why would you not be able to even have that conversation? Why would those things be so offensive? It shows you that there is a totem. There's a sacred idea around which everybody is shepherded. And then on top of that idea, which has good justifications at the beginning or good arguments to say, no, it's not all lives matter, it's Black Lives Matter until Black Lives Matter as much as all lives matter. Like there's all those arguments at the beginning, but it starts to reinforce itself, and then it Trojan horses all of these ideas like new equity center, more space in the dorms. I want my grades to be solved, or I want this teacher to be put to pasture because they didn't say the right thing or said the wrong thing. All these other things start getting attached to that sacred idea. And that's the weird thing about this movement. Is that there is no Mao. There's the Cultural Revolution without the Mao. There's the Scientology without the L. Ron Hubbard. And you can go through and you can kind of assemble them, but it's built around hashtags. It's built around these ideas, and it's crowdsourced. I think it might be unique to this point in history with the internet. I think it might be, we're seeing the first kind of really crowdsourced cultural movement. And will that lead to a crowdsourced, like Reformation, constitutional convention, or something where we update our entire society in this new form that we're seeing play out in this?
Well, yeah, I think what we're seeing is a sped up execution or play out of what we've seen in the past many, many times.
Yeah,
the Maoist Revolution, the Russian Revolution, 1917, all the revolutions, you go back in French Revolution in history, American Revolution even.
American Revolution was unique in that it actually set up something stable.
Oh yeah, no. I'm tracking on that. What I'm trying to say is I'm talking about the beginning parts, and I'm trying to say that what you just spoke to about hashtags, yeah, that's an internet application of what used to be pamphleting and going door to door. And there was a lot more work involved for the people who wanted to rile up people. And so they had to go do that footwork. And they had to go speak in the bars and speak in the inns and speak at the town corner and stuff. So it took longer. to generate the level of social outrage that was required in order for something to happen. And now it happens so much faster that we go, God damn, where'd this come from? It just came out of nowhere, you know? It's a weakness of us that we are susceptible to that. And that's why cults can happen. And people don't just look at cult leaders and go, well, that guy's nuts. Because there's a tipping point, right, where you get enough people on board. And once enough people are on board, it becomes this viable, it becomes capable of a life of its own. And that's what we are seeing with this now, where we saw the microcosm. Now we have the macrocosm. So now we got to like, oh boy, we really got to talk about this now because now it's getting big. When it was small and manageable, we went, wow, that was kind of kooky. Boy, I'm glad we, kind of got through that. But when it happens nationwide, when everybody or a ton of people are getting on board with the beginning parts of it that make sense, are rational, are reasonable, because that's how you sell it. You sell it with the stuff that everybody's going to accept. And then they buy into this set of ideas, and then you feed them the next level of ideas. And then you feed them the next level of ideas. It takes time to do this. So you have to use the memes and the hashtags to get them on board. And then everybody's buying Robin DiAngelo's book. And, and not everybody's going to understand it. In fact, most people probably won't. But they won't critically think about it either. So they won't reject it. They'll just go, oh, that's kind of complicated and above my pay grade, and it'll sit on my bookshelf. But Black Lives Matter. Ah! And every time they see Robin DiAngelo or see Black Lives Matter, they go, whatever they're doing, it's good. And that's our weakness. That's how we have that codependent relationship with the cult leaders, but it's also how outside of a cult leader, you can still get that phenomena going. And I think that's what's happening right now with this. I don't know now I'm soapboxing. What do you?
Well, if you look at I'm in a strong position because I've been working on something that looks to be replicated at a national level. So I can go through and I can look at the experiences that I've documented and that I've studied, and then apply the lessons to the larger societal phenomena, just to describe it, but also ultimately to give people paths through that maze of critical theory or through their confessionals program, like they're purging the whiteness, racism, hourly, shindig that's going to replace church now. And there's multiple ways of dealing with what we're seeing. But first and foremost, I think, I don't know if we said this or not, it's that you kind of have to say, okay, I do want to forward, I guess human rights is something that is safe enough to say, okay, I want human rights. I think equality is a good thing. Actually, I want to interact with people freely and openly and create things with them. Like, that's a value that I hold. I went to a college where that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a bunch of products and be around people who wanted to do that too. When that system came in, that destroyed my ability to do that thing. It corroded my ability to plug into a community of creators, because that community was not about creation. It was about justice. And that justice didn't really make sense to me in the context that they were trying to enact justice on themselves and even myself in the long run. But but the weird thing is that a lot of the momentum of this stuff is going to implement this justice component to every institution. And I think people need to be aware of what that arm of your institution is going to be doing, and how does it really operate, and how does it think about itself, and what can you do to not be grasped and molested by that arm, because it will start to edit your behavior inside of your company, even just on the level of your speech, but that goes to the level of your thought, and then that goes to the level of your potential speech and thought too. Exactly.
And how many times do we need to learn this lesson, folks?
Every 3 generations, maybe? I don't know.
It certainly seems that way. Hey, everyone. Recently, I've been checking out the misinformation threat on the Great Courses Plus. It was so interesting to learn that Russia not only ran internet disinformation campaigns against us in the 2016 election, but that this practice has been a long standing practice that they used in the Ukraine too. Misinformation comes from lots of different places, though, and we can inadvertently forward this even if we have the best of intentions. It might seem far fetched that a foreign adversary might be interested in sowing discontent and division in our country until you think about what a brilliant and modern strategy that is, since it only involves paying keyboard warriors to do their fighting. A lot cheaper and easier than using guns and weapons of mass destruction. This is just a small part of what you learn when you take advantage of the Great Courses Plus. This streaming service has an extensive course library across a huge number of topics, from cooking to finance to stress and so much more. You can even use the Great Courses Plus to supplement homeschooling. All of the content is objective and fact-based and easy to access anytime, anywhere. So don't wait any longer. Sign up for the Great Courses Plus today. I've arranged for my listeners to get a full month of unlimited access for free. To start your free month trial, sign up today using my special URL. Go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. Do it today. Yeah, so you hated kindergarten. That's interesting.
I loved it. I loved it. Children are absolutely essential to my well-being, my mental well-being, being around that sort of plasticity of thought and that imagination and that focus and that immediacy is absolutely essential for my own well-being. And interacting with that was very enriching, but it wasn't really making me established in the world, right? I needed to focus on my focus, which at that point was literature. Now, when I checked out Evergreen, it was sold to me as a highly independent-oriented education. And in a nutshell, for the most part, you don't take a number of classes, you take a program. The program's 16 credits long, and it lasts one semester, 10 weeks, or it's the entire year. It's one program, entire year. For example, probably the pinnacle of the Evergreen education at Evergreen that I received was my second year at Evergreen. I took a course called Dark Romantics, and it focused on the 19th century in France. And we studied philosophy, literature, photography, art, and history. And a couple of other things. And there was different professors, like 4 or 5 or 6 of the language. We studied the language too. So it was fully immersive, and all the teachers were from these various different disciplines, and all of it was all integrated. And then at the end of that, we went to France and we did a final project in France, right? So it was completely it was like this one course, which is a blessing and a curse. If you look at it from the view of what happened with regards to the protests, you have this year-long tunnel vision course of critical race theory, and then at the very end of it, you produce the product, right? You do your final project, and it's a group project, and you all get together, and you balls to the wall, Evergreen style, you take it to the utmost limit. So that mode of education where you are interacting with one professor, 2 professors, you have a core professor, right, where you do seminars with, leads to, if you get a really good teacher, a really good experience. If you get a mediocre teacher, it's really mediocre, but you can always just do extra work on top of that, which is what I did. I wrote a novel for every class that I was in. I was like, okay, I'm studying this, and I'm going to write a novel to marry what I want to do with what I do, right? I thought of it as narrative arts, as the practice and the theory of fiction, right? So I brought a lot to it because I had that perspective and I had that drive. But you put a lot of people who Evergreen over the course of time was having some problems with enrollment. So they decreased the expectations that they had for students, where I think it was at 98% acceptance rate by the time that I got there. So you have a lot of people in a wide range of interest in being there, of academic readiness, and the college, even though it was accepting a lot of probably not college-ready students, wasn't actually doing the work of getting them up to speed. It wasn't really pouring a lot of attention into their writing skills, into their reading skills. What it privileged was their oppression skills. And I tried to get a job at the writing center, and because even though I had written, sorry to say this, like about 20 novels in my lifetime, I'd spent like hours and hours and hours like practicing writing, even though I had all of this this expertise and I was pretty damn proficient with the page, because I didn't sign up for anti-oppression, their entire anti-oppression teaching. Like, that was the litmus test. They asked me, do you believe in anti-oppression work? And I'm like, I believe in the writing of good literature, and I don't know how to focus on a page and focus on saving the world at the same time. Like, I think that if you gain the skills of clear communication, you can do whatever you want with them. But if you learn what those skills are for and you don't concentrate on the actual skills, like, you're going to be really pathetic anti-oppression advocate. And that's what you see in a lot of the footage. A lot of the students don't have really developed communication skills, really developed critical thinking skills, really developed debating skills, but they do have the skill of believing in what they believe in. And because that's what they've been taught. So I don't know where we were going with that, but I just want to contextualize my experience of Evergreen and why we see what happened at Evergreen happen the way it did.
Well, no, I asked you about that because I was wondering why you went there. Yeah. And how it promoted itself. And it seems to have promoted itself as the exact opposite of the experience that you had, especially near the end.
Yeah,
but
at the end.
It seems like through the whole thing, if the freshman orientation on day one is, this is how we view the world and this is how we're going to educate you to view the world, is through a racist lens or a racial lens, then
I would broaden that to identity lens. It was just about race, but really LGBTQ stuff is really strong there, and just identity.
Politics factory.
Yeah.
That's not what colleges are for. That should be one part of your college education, is learning that exists. Here's the pros and cons of it, through time and history, and as it has manifested itself. And that would be a course that would be worthwhile. That would be something worth taking. But to put you into that frame of mind and then educate you as though everything you look at must be viewed through that lens and that lens only. There's a word that I have for that, and it's called a cult. And, it's a single ideology that drives a worldview through, from which you derive all your narratives.
Yeah.
And if you do not accept that this is true, or if you push back against it or challenge it, then you are ostracized. You're not, it's that nobody wants you questioning things. And that is the exact opposite of, I think, what most of us understand higher education to be about. So how long did it take you? I mean, did you go in there, go through that orientation on the first few days and start wondering what you'd gotten yourself into? Or were you just kind of rolling with it and it took a while before the red flags started showing up?
Well, I started in the middle of the school year.
Oh, you did?
So I wasn't there for orientation, but
oh, okay.
I know for a fact that the orientation became more ideological over the course of my time there. When I first arrived, it was pretty odd. I felt like I was stepping back to 1992, like a hyper-liberal college of 1992. A lot of political correctness that I thought was out of fashion. Little did I know that it's the biggest fashion of the day now. With like posters everywhere about dismantling the patriarchy, and I don't want to get into if you are a believer in the patriarchy, I don't want to argue with.
No, you're not. I'm not a believer in the patriarchy. But
okay, well, I'm talking to your audience either. I don't want to turn them off. But
like
just that kind of rhetoric, like this is the narrative. This is what we believe, and going in there and seeing a lot of young people dealing with their identities as a 20-year-old kid, young person will be playing around with their identity. Am I this kind of person? Am I that kind of person? And identity politic kind of concretizes these identities as something that are more stable than they actually are, right? Like I'm a homosexual, or I'm bisexual, or I'm pansexual, or I have this gender, that gender, or I'm this race or that race. Those are parts of us that have some amount of traction and stability, but the way that a young mind interacts with them kind of turns them into idols. Right. And I saw that from the students, and I kind of shrugged that off. But the way that the college was teaching this stuff called privilege, that's what kind of sent my like a little spidey sense. Like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Like, you're going to assign me privilege in the moment, and then everybody else is going to assign privilege to everybody else in the moment, and that's all going to start to distance you. It just felt off, but like I just kind of like would joke about it with the older students around me. Like I'd find the one or two free thinking or like thinking person to kind of mock this stuff, because it's really rudimentary. But once George Bridges comes on the scene in 2015, and he declares that race and fixing the racial disparities in the world are the number one priority of our moment, of our time, and then empowers these professors who already have really strong radical ideas to berate other professors for not having strong enough ideals, and then setting up these workshops, these lectures. And at these workshops and these lectures, nobody ever questions. Like there's no debate about this stuff. It's just a bunch of people who agree.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, is what's it like in these classrooms and these workshops? Because it doesn't sound like there's a free flow of ideas going on in them.
Well, the way it's framed, I don't know if you saw you probably saw the one orientation where at the beginning, everybody says their privileges. Like, if you start with, like, I am a white, hetero, cis man, Marxist political economist, how are you today? Like that frames the entire thing. So already out the gate, that is the accepted mode of interaction. And the gender pronoun thing, we don't have to get into that, but that was just another way of enforcing speech upon people. And by the time we got to my last year, we had to start every class saying our gender pronouns, which isn't, and I don't want to get into an argument about the validity or the validity or the invalidity. I bring it up because of the sanctimoniousness with which we were submitted to this very quiet, like, you have to remember everybody's sacred little marker of identity. And the attitude that it reinforced of the identity is first and foremost, and ergo, because of the oppression, facilitates this radiation of looking for offense, looking for reinforcement of this narrative, and then stomping on people, always mocking white men, always. Every there was one identity. They made racism illegal, except for one point. They made discrimination illegal across the board, except for one identity could shoulder all of that, because that white man was strong enough to do that. In a way, the white man was powerful enough to shoulder all of our blame. And so he was mocked all the time, in little ways and in big ways.
How is it that you go through, how do you see this or this subject matter or this idea here? Let me see if I can word this properly. You have this assumed, and maybe this is the fundamental assumption I'm making that is false. You have this assumption that the goal of a Black Lives Matter movement or of racial diversity training and awareness and this sort of thing, gender identities, whatever social, thing you're doing. You have this idea that this is being put forward in such a way that we will treat each other better, that we won't look to these identities as bases for discrimination or prejudice. That we won't, that we don't want to have a world where people are castigated or prejudiced or are, get second place in line or back of the bus or whatever because of who they are or what they are, that they really can't even help. I mean, when it comes to like something like skin color or something, there's nothing you can do about that. That's the lottery, that you won or lost, being born into this world. So there's this assumption I've always had that the idea with all of this is to move the ball of progressive ideas down the road so that we are all in a place where we get that those are not valid reasons to discriminate against people, that those are not good reasons to hate on somebody, that they have nothing to do with who the person actually is and what they stand for and what they can do and what they bring to the table, that we're going to move all of that out of the way. So imagine my surprise when I'm watching in these videos, teachers, professors as well as students who parrot what the teachers say, talk about how I am taking their identity away by not recognizing their identity, that all lives matter is an insult because it somehow deadens or disperses or takes away from their identity. And it got me to realize in that what appeared to me to be a fantastic moment of hypocrisy, that the end result of this can't be what I just laid out in my assumptions about what this was all about. That it's actually a runaway train in the exact opposite way. And so it was zero surprise to me to learn that segregation is something that is actually wanted now by certain aspects or certain elements of these movements. And I just go, what? Are we all taking a giant step 70 years backwards? Is that what we're really trying to do right now? And it appears to me that that is what's happening. Now, having said all that, am I off the rails here?
Well, it might be the case that the reason that they don't allow you to have a sense of humor is because then you would recognize the utter irony of what they're actually doing.
So my assumptions are not off base.
You know what? I have not seen these ideas act out in a way where they don't result in disaster. But now that everybody's is being forced to accept these ideas, maybe it will lead to the city on the hill. Maybe this will lead to utopia. Maybe confession is the way forward. Maybe bowing down and pushing people away and out of society who don't get on board this will actually lead to what they expect. I don't think it's going to happen for different reasons, just because it basically comes down to my moral sensibilities, my moral intuitions about how I treat other human beings. I'll give you a little anecdote. Mm-hmm. So I go to the Evergreen State College. It blows up, just completely blows up all around me. I get stuck in a struggle session where I'm yelled at and told to shut up and told to speak and then told to shut up again. And, just put through the ringer, like literally a struggle session that the professor in my freaking class empowered the students to do to other students. And
if I could stop you for just a second, because I want to make sure that one, I know what you're talking about, and two, that my audience does too. Maybe this term is certainly something I've never heard before. A struggle session?
You haven't heard of struggle sessions?
I'm sorry, I haven't. What is it?
These are going to be everywhere. They were employed during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where the students were empowered by Mao by means of, they had this little red book, and Robin DiAngelo has written the little red book of our current cultural revolution, White Fragility. Look into that or don't. But what the students would do was they would take the person of authority, usually the teacher, and then mock them and shame them and put all of the weight of all of capitalism and all of the evils of the world onto that individual, and then perform this ritual that sometimes would result in murder, but definitely result in the ruination of that person's life, right? In some case, it wasn't always murder, but they were they're very negative to their professors. And I show footage of that later on in the series, and I set it side by side with how the people's body language is even acting during these movements. It's the same exact stuff. So what my professor wanted us to do was to work through this ancestral trauma. And that was one of the things that Evergreen began to put into the water that I saw over the course of those last 2 years that I was there, was that it became more and more about the psychology and about the trauma and dealing with people's oppression and centering their needs. And when I was trying to work for the Writing Center, like one of the lessons that you learn is that correcting somebody's grammar is a form of white supremacy.
We're using big words.
You're stripping them of their ancestral heritage, and you're killing their truth. For what? For material gains, for a job, for a career? Is it really worth doing that? Like, well, why do we have a Writing Center then? It's just another arm of the thought factory, right? So
they recreated Maoist revolution struggle sessions in a classroom environment where you as a student were subjected to this by the other students.
Yeah. I recorded it, just the audio, unfortunately. But
did you think you were paying for that, going to that college?
By that point I was just holding more and more in because it was just so ridiculous, right? And I was just like holding it in. But after that class, I wrote my teacher a very apologetic letter. It was very polite because my grades depended on his evaluation, right? So you don't want to piss off the teacher that's going to give me, and his evaluation is going to be on top of my document. His evaluation would be the first thing that you would read if you wanted to know what I did at the Evergreen State College, right? Because that's the power that he held. So I was very I'm like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't think that that's the right way to do things. I would ask if you're going to do that again, I'm just not going to show up and I'll take the credit. I'll take the docking credit because I can't be a part of that. I don't think that is correct at all, the way that they're behaving.
Yeah.
So anyway, I want to get
what was his response to that? Sorry.
He was very differential. It's like, okay, I'll talk to the students about that. Yeah, they can go a little overboard. But if you listen to the audio, he was kind of getting them to go along. Kind of a sadistic guy.
All right, fair enough. What did you want to talk about there?
So there's an anecdote. So I was subject to this really intense racial harassment. And it got to a point where if I saw a black student on the campus, I would walk the other way because I didn't want to be harassed. And I never thought that about people. I mean, when I lived in Chicago, and I'd be careful when I walked around at night, but it wasn't even, I got harassed, but just about any male around at night, it wasn't about that. So I just want to put that in the context of, I didn't have that response towards individuals until after being subjected to that. I remember this one point where a black man walks around the corner and I'm like, oh no, it's going to happen again, right? Like that was my experience. So this is the anecdote. So I take off, I graduate, I don't go to the freaking ceremony, screw that shit. I go to visit with my family in Northern California. We get this cabin, for a family vacation. And my brother's got his new bride from Brazil, and they're going to get married there, and we have a little ceremony. And we're just hanging out. And 2 days after we're all hanging out, I look across the patio, and I'm like, oh, she's black. Like, I totally forgot to even look at that. Like, I was just interacting with my new sister. Like, I had no concept of race. I was totally colorblind. And then, this cascade of, ironies hit me. It's like, oh, I was supposed to recognize that first and foremost. But she's out of the country, and she's a different culture. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that I was so locked into this racial narrative where race signified so much that in their pursuit of trying to refine that value of being colorblind, because to be colorblind is to rob somebody of their history, so you're not supposed to be colorblind. In the move away from colorblindness, they got us to the point, everybody on Evergreen got us to the point where we could not see past race anymore. We couldn't see through race anymore. Race became the major way that we interacted with one another.
Right.
Which allowed all of that behavior because you can't criticize those people. Those people, you can't criticize them.
Wow. That's interesting. And of course, everything you just said would, of course, in the critical race theory playbook would just reinforce how white you are and how horrible you are and how racist you are.
There's certain, I want to bring this up. So we were talking about indoctrination. And once I got out of Evergreen and I began to speak about it, I began to experiment with criticizing it, right? And I know I've made some mistakes. And I know if somebody pours through my backlog, they'll see some things that I probably say that were rather insensitive. Because I was grappling towards figuring out how to critique this thing, how to criticize this thing, and how to find an alternative to it. And when you're in an environment that doesn't allow any criticism, you can't practice the criticism. And when you ramp up the power of the blowback for saying the wrong thing, like you can't go through the process of figuring out the right way to engage with it. Basically, I was presented with the choice of becoming their kind of radical or becoming another kind of radical. And I didn't want to become the other kind of radical. So I had to become that other kind of radical in the sense of, as soon as you speak out against us, we're going to call you a white supremacist, alt-right bigot. I'm like, okay, I will allow you to call me that, but I'm not going to be that way. I'm not going to be that way. But I know you're going to call me that, and I'll prove to the world eventually that I'm not that way. So that's one of the problems that a lot of people are going to be faced right now. If they want to question this anti-racist doctrine, it's set up in such a way that to be against anti-racism makes you more racist than the anti-racist who already knows that they're racist. It's built against you that you're going to have to take a heavy hit if you don't bow, if you don't bend the knee.
And that actually is all part and parcel of the entire ideology, because we have, prior to this ideology coming into play, prior to the concepts of this stuff that I think most of us grew up with, or at least that my generation, in my area and the way I grew up,
Gen X,
is that these labels mean things that are significant and important. That if you're
like racism,
if you're a racist, I mean, that's a Klan member. That's a guy who burns crosses on people's lawns. That's a guy who lynches black people. That's a guy who hates on people for no other reason than for their skin color, right? As Daryl Davis, the brilliant black activist who has deconverted KKK members himself in conversation. He collects KKK robes as a hobby. The guy's amazing. He's amazing, right? But his most basic fundamental question dealing with these people, these racists, true racists, as I grew up understanding the term, is to ask them point blank, how is it you can hate me when you don't even know me?
Yeah.
And that is a really, really important question. And for me, that has always been the defining question of, what is racism? What is bigotry? What is sexism? What is misogyny? It's an unthinking, it doesn't have anything to do with the real world. It has to do with, I see everything through this lens of black and white world, or women, men, and if women, all women are evil and all men are good, right? This kind of thing. That's the extremism with which I identified these words. Mm-hmm, That's not what these kids are being taught.
There's different levels of that.
About this.
There's different levels of this, and my original critique that my thesis when I first came out of the Evergreen Closet, my first thesis was that the professors, these academicians, had taken a sociological view of the world where if you look at the identity groups, you'll see that some identity groups are ahead of other identity groups. And you'll see that the ones that are ahead got there because they didn't suffer the same things that the people that behind have suffered. Or they have directly aided and abetted the oppression of the people who are behind. Now, that is a valid way of looking at the data. Like if you go through the data, and one of my family members sent us a video where the guy just goes through the data of like, this is the median income of the black people versus white people. Here's the ownership. If you just look at the material facts of existence on the level of the identity groups, you'll see major disparities, and you can tie them to a history of oppression, overt or covert. Now, that's the problem. What the Evergreen,
like that's
for
the
whatever
real
reason,
problem, you mean? That's the actual real problem.
Yeah, this is a problem, and it has been over. We have made strides, and there's more work to do. And we've changed laws. We've made big steps, but the repercussions of that haven't hashed themselves out. Now, what they do, this is the sleight of hand, and one sleight of hand that they make is to say that everybody who's white is constantly oppressing and constantly participating in this idea that they are superior to other people of other races. And you can see that because they don't go out of their way to invite these people into their life, or they talk about including these white people or these people of color. And what they end up doing, what ends up happening is that the identity is associated, and they literally did this in one of these training sessions where they put up all these different identity categories, and then they asked the class or whoever is there, who is the most privileged? Which is the most privileged gender? Male. Which is the most privileged race? White. What is the most privileged economic status? What's the most privileged gender? What's the most privileged sexuality, right? And you end up with this formula that's very, very similar to what I would argue the Nazis did to the Jews, to say who's on top, because that's who is keeping us behind. It's this identity group. So you take this data, you distill it into the identity, and then you assign every vector of that through intersectionality. Every vector of your identity is given a relative moral weight to it between privileged and oppressed. And what you're supposed to kind of do is recognize you're privileged or recognize your oppression and work to make those things equal. So if I'm a man, I should put myself behind a woman. If I'm white, I should put myself behind the black person. And because in order to shift towards equality and towards fairness, all of the whole world, what the problem with doing that is that it reduces the interaction between two individuals to this calculus of privilege and oppression, so that no two individuals can actually ever connect with each other. You can only connect with people of your own identity group. And even then, you're just acting out a script that was passed on to you. So there's no authentic, real emergent phenomena. What that leads to is an incredible amount of stress in individuals who can no longer just relate to one another. They have to relate through this constant work between, there's just conflict and struggle in every interaction. There's always inequality in every interaction. And that leads to eventually a dissolution of the fabric of society. That absolutely kills the community in the end. So there's this kind of trickle-down effect of these high ideas kind of coming into interpersonal relationships where they don't actually belong.
Well, and I was about to say that exactly that, because the interpersonal relation dynamics then become one of identity versus identity. And yet I thought the whole struggle was to not do that.
Well, it's no longer to not do that. And one of the mouthpieces of anti-racist education, he's very popular right now. You'll probably end up taking a workshop from him if you work at a company. Like, he's going to be in your face. You're going to have to read his book. It's called Anti-Racism, or How to Be an Anti-Racist. And his name's Ibram X. Kendi. And he says outright that there's no such thing as not being a racist. There's denial. Right. Or there's confession. So you're either a racist or an anti-racist. There's no such thing as a neutral ground here. Yeah,
you either get into our cult or we're going to persecute you.
No, and I posted some footage of him today on my channel about him saying, well, I don't think that you should cancel people, but if they don't really make their confession, if they don't really make up for that racist thing they did, then I'm not going to stop you from canceling them either. Well, how do you decide what's the absolute racist thing? And this is the problem. And this is what happened in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, is that Mao taught that capitalism is evil, the students acted as though the capitalist is evil, right? So they're teaching us that whiteness is evil, but when the rubber hits the road, it actually, the human animal interacts with the other human animal as a concrete entity. And so what's happening now across high schools and colleges is all these kids are starting to say, did you post that Black Lives Matter thing? No, you didn't post that Black Lives Matter thing. Did you say that enough time? I don't really believe you. I think that you're really not on board with this. Therefore, we're all going to gang up on you. It's happening all over, really rapidly, all over the place.
It actually is. It touched my Twitter account the other day. I mean, in a very small way. I had to block like 4 or 5 people. I mean, it really wasn't like I'm being attacked or I'm claiming victimhood here. But the fact that it's coming all the way to me, I'm a little content creator with a little Twitter channel, with a little Twitter following. I think I got like, I don't know, a couple thousand people. A little tiny YouTube channel, 36,000 subscribers, not huge, right? And it's hitting me, for speaking up about this and for retweeting right-wing sources.
Oh no, yeah.
I'm a bad boy because I'm retweeting right-wing sources, right? So yeah, I definitely get it. And of course, I've been in Scientology, so I definitely get how all this works. I mean, none of what we're talking about is anything new or surprising or different for me. I just wish people would understand that that's true. That I have my own lived experience of extremist mindsets, and I know where this goes. And you correctly bring it back to another example of how these techniques and methods and teaching ideologies were used, and that was in the Maoist revolution. And everything we know about extremist mindsets and how cults operate comes out of the study of that time.
Plug that guy's book. What's it called again?
Yeah. Let's repeat it on a national scale in the United States on an issue that everybody can get on board with, because nobody really likes the KKK except the fucking KKK. So we can all get on board that that's bad, and let's get rid of it, right? We don't want cops murdering people, black, white, yellow, blue, whatever. We don't want dead innocent people at the hands of cops. Let's get on board with that. That sounds good. I'm okay with that. And that's the entrance gate. That's the same thing as Scientology saying, I can help you with a problem that you're having with your mom or your kids. And you go, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And you step in, and suddenly you're in this whole world of critical race theory. And that's what I'm pushing back against. But I really need people to see that the surface level stuff is the good stuff, just like in Scientology. That's the stuff you want. You like it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
That's not the part we're railing against.
Yeah. You have to constantly say that, constantly center.
Yeah.
And actually do the work for them. If they want to end racism, actually develop better anti-racist tools than they have, or take the ones that are already developed and then go to town on them, because they actually, if they're better ideas, people are going to actually feel more joy for them. It's going to hit them on a more fuller human level, and it's not going to be as restraining.
And this is what disturbs me about the rhetoric that comes out of this group, is because all lives matter is now a swear word.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to happen if I start saying, hey, you know what's a really good idea? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, that's a document that everyone should be getting behind. There's whole countries that won't endorse that damn thing. But it was put forward as a solution at a national level at an international level to World War II. Eleanor Roosevelt helped get organized, putting that whole thing together. And it is a clear-cut statement of the rights of every single human being, regardless of who you are or where you were born or anything about you. If you're human, those rights apply to you. Why don't we adopt that? Oh, no, that can't be, because you're trying to, divide and this and that and the other thing. Like, it's already all set up in their rhetoric to kill any alternative solution.
Ultimately,
or how do you see it?
There's going to be a number. Okay, so we have to think of the long game now. Like, what's the ultimate outcome of this? The energy, the youthful energy is going to run itself out, but actually I think that it's going to perpetuate for a while. I was thinking that the youthful blah was just going to be like evergreen, it's going to be over with. But because there's so many little camps of teens like indoctrinating each other, they'll probably do that all summer long and probably do that into the fall and perform some struggle sessions against their racist high school teacher. Because the definition of racism is anything that sounds vaguely offensive to anybody of a non-white race. That's basically the problem with these ideas, is that once they're universally adopted, it causes universal destruction. So, not to give that, there's that level of things that will eventually run itself out. It'll run its course. What will be a bigger problem is the amount of corporate and municipal energies and resources put into these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion that will go through and force you and then revise or review your obedience to these ideas. And if you look at the founding document, Robin DiAngelo and this Kendi guy, they really, really want basically reparations. They want equalization. So they'll talk about equity, not equality. Equality it doesn't lead to fairness. Equity is the way to go. And equity means equalization. And it's basically Robin Hood on a bureaucratic level where you see, and it's not just resources, but they ultimately want resources, but they also want moral authority too. So they want you to give your money and they want you to give your time, but they also want you to give your sense of sovereignty, importance, and like you need to cede your moral sovereignty to these people. And that's why I find it disturbing that the washing of the feet and the kneeling has become really big right now. And it started as a sign of solidarity to point out a certain aspect of, let's say, when that football player took the knee, it was nominally about just bringing attention to the way that black people are treated by police, right? But now it's no longer that. Now it actually means I'm bowing to the mob. I'm ceding my authority to the mob, and that's what they want. That's a form of reparation that they want.
It's a kind of soft cultural revolution.
Hopefully it'll stay soft, yeah. But that's like a soft drink, it'll eat through a nail if you leave it in there long enough.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Because here's the thing, and I got a whole shirt about this. I mean, we have V for, God, what was that? Jesus.
V for victory? V for
Vendetta? No, not V. Vendetta, that's it. Yeah, V for Vendetta. I love that movie. I love that movie. That is a good movie, right? But the ideology behind it makes sense. There's an authoritarian 1984 like state, controlled media, this kind of thing, and here's a guy stepping up and starting to blow some shit up to take it out and incite people to step up and do something about it. Great, against authoritarian regimes. That's exactly what we want. Is the United States an authoritarian regime? No, it's not, but it sure is being painted that way. Mm-hmm. Our systems actually work. 2 cases went against Trump in the last couple of days. Big cases, important cases, DACA, LGBT rights. These were important for him. And he lost. He lost hard because our checks and balances don't work fast, but eventually they do work. And what's the thing about, the arc of justice or something is slow, but
bends towards, the arc of history bends towards justice. Yeah.
Towards justice, that's right. That's the statement, right? So, and I believe that because if you look at our history and you look at, I don't know, I know this is not good for in some people's eyes, but Steven Pinker's work. I mean, you've got the Factfulness body over in Europe who were working on trying to show everybody the world's actually getting better. Oh, actually, this brings another question I wanted to ask you about to mind, which is this seems to be a very American-centric movement because it's all about American slavery, American heritage, American history, tearing down these things. How America has, created these things through slavery. This has gotten over into Britain. I know statues are coming down over there, and there's been, and they have their own checkered past with this. What do they have to say about, like, I don't know, places where whites are not in charge and never really have been? I mean, what about those places?
Well, I think there's concentric circles of what this activism is about. And one major key component of this current unrest that we're watching has to do with this little-known virus called COVID-19.
And really, what's that?
Well, it was some invisible force in the world that caused the governments, at least in Europe and America, to lock up a lot of their populace. And we have been cooped up. And so what you're seeing in a way is the release of that pent-up energy. And I thought it was just going to go back into the economy. Little did I know that when students don't have studies to study or where they're just locked inside all day on their Zoom machines, that they're going to want to go outside and get some shit out, And so that's what they're doing. So there's that aspect of it where it's not really thinking that the mob just needs to expend some energy because it hasn't had any group activity. There hasn't been a release valve. I don't know about the narrative and how it spills out into other countries. I do know that there's a certain strain of the West that has been very critical of the West and has been trying to find ways to bring the West down. And every different Western culture has a weakness. Every single successful entity has something that they're guilty of or has done something wrong. And what you find in these different cultures is these same ideas being applied to the original sin of that country. America's original sin, I think, would probably be high fructose corn syrup, but I'm kidding. According to the narrative, it is racism or slavery, I guess. So that's why this narrative is very fecund and active around that, because it can exploit that guilt and that shame on the societal level and cause that upset.
It's interesting to me, the historical denialism that has to occur in order for this ideology to take hold. You have to ignore so much of history, just outright. Just either ignore it or start engaging in historical revisionism and say it never happened in the first place, which is even worse. Of slavery in the African continent, slavery on the Indian subpeninsula, slavery throughout Asia, slavery throughout Europe through the 80s. To call it what we did, yes, a horrible, horrible thing. Don't get me wrong, man. I'm no fucking slave apologist. I am not about slavery anywhere. But to say America started it or America is the place where it was the worst or something it's just not true. It has nothing to do with reality. I don't know. Am I off base in bringing that up?
I just published an interview with John Wood, who is, I guess, only because it matters in this conversation. He's a black guy in California, and he's in LA. And he's a really conservative person, and he's working on the Braver Angels Project, which is about kind of couples counseling for Democrats and Republicans, trying to get these parties to have civic discourse, right? And he's really
that's a challenge.
Yeah. So I had him on to talk about race and talk about the racial conversation to get his perspective, hoping that he would give us some tools. And he sat me down and he gave me a crash course on what it was like for Black America, how they were stripped of their culture. They had a hard reboot under very difficult circumstances. And it's arguable that they're the only civilization or culture, let's say, that's had to do that in the modern time. Like Black America were completely disenfranchised of their inherited knowledge. So they didn't have that inherited knowledge. So when Black people come from Jamaica here or from Kenya here, and they get way ahead of even white people, and they do, it's because they have their culture interacts with this culture in a completely different way. So, and he sat down and he went through.
That's a really good point. That's a really
every advancement that was granted to the Black community in America was also coupled with some sort of drawback, with some sort of economic consequence. He talks about he gives this really beautiful or horrific summary of how the LA riots in 1992 happened, where you have this constant leap forward of the black community and then the suppression of their economic power because there's all these immigrants coming through and taking all their jobs. A lot of manufacturing jobs go over to China. Then the drug trade comes in. Then the police reinforce the drug trade. So you just see.
So you know that none of that was was because there was some racist structure overseeing this and being a guiding hand, or is that the idea?
I'm trying to get to a place where if I can see the legitimate grievances,
yeah,
and support the reformations that will help this generation to get a little further ahead than the last generation in my country, if I can do that and empower that, I will be taking away the power of the people who would use that to destroy us. Right? So that's what I'm doing. So I do a lot of criticizing of the critical race theory. I try not to criticize the protesters because they'll come after me eventually. I criticize the ideas that are wrong, and I try to supplement that with positive ideas. So I don't know how that would translate into going out of a cult by giving somebody something else. I don't know if that's one way of getting out of a cult, just trying to translate it into your area of expertise. If people kind of swap it out with something else that's more healthy, you still need an ideology. You still need some sort of belief system. So the trick is to find the correct one to replace the bad one. Is that
actually true? 4 out of 5 people are going to need a substitute belief set or an ideology. That is definitely true. Or they will.
What does that 1/5 do?
Fall back. The other
Nihilism?
5th might be that, not nihilism, but I'm not a nihilist, man.
Fruitful nihilism?
I swear I am. I swear. I just go with the data, and science and the best of our research doesn't give me the ability to buy into wooey ideas, and that's where I'm kind of stuck. But there's a way to reconcile that, but it's hard. It's really hard, and I get why most people aren't going to do that, and they would rather substitute another ideology for it. I get that. I'm not bashing that. I'm not saying it's some horrible thing, because it's just the human condition. I can't do anything about that.
Yeah, but I would question if what you believe in isn't an ideology, or why would you even not call it an ideology? If it can be codified, then it can actually be shared. Like classical liberalism, let's say. Like if you codify that, I think that's still a replacement, because you need that framework. You need a way of framing and making sense of the world. If you can just translate it into the kind of similar terms as the ideology or the religion that's operating in other people, you can show it has extra features that this other thing doesn't have, but it still has the same basic function of giving you stability in an ever-changing world or something like that.
Yeah. No, you're making a very good point. I have not come out of the situation I was in, said all the things I've said about it, done all the research I've done about it, to come to a place where I've got a better idea for everybody. I'm not that guy. I'm not trying to push that, right? I'm not trying to be anybody's guru or be anybody's ideologue or get on a pulpit for a position, except this: human rights. If I have a position, if I have an agenda, if I have a world I want to see come out of all of this, it is let's stop finding excuses to hate each other, and let's figure out. I know, man. You call me a nihilist, and then I say shit like that, right? So, but okay.
You're a naive nihilist, so you're charming as you look into the abyss. I'm kidding. I'm on board with you. I'm just saying, I'm just bringing some irony into the conversation by saying, okay, let's find a reason for people to stop hating each other. It's like, okay, I guess sports.
Well, no. I mean, sure, sports definitely serve a function that way, actually, except when they become Brazilian, soccer riots, or the UK, and when things get absolutely batshit crazy. So, No, I think we need to be learning about ourselves. I think we have some very, very goofy ideas about who we are and what we're all about as human beings. And it's only very, very recently that we're even starting to look at, neuroscience and psychology as an actual like science that could move forward with something versus nonsense it's been. So I know it's goofy, but that's why I don't have a formal ideology around all of this. It's just, hey man, it's chaos. Be kind. Let's just get along. That I know it sounds weak. I know it sounds naive, but I'll tell you what,
I agree.
That idea is way better than anything critical race theory has to offer. And there are people who've written whole books about that. My whole book would be a pamphlet saying it's chaos, be kind.
Yeah. There was you brought up earlier, there was a moment that made me think of a moment when I was in a privilege workshop and I was supposed to confess my privileges and bear my underprivileges. And I'm just sitting there. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do this because I know what you're going to do. You're just going to lecture me. And it's going to be a shitty lecture. And let me tell you what, I had 20 years of sermons. So I know good preachers from bad preachers. And the moment you open your mouth, I know what I was getting. But but she goes on, Rashida Love, she's in the footage. But she's not actually, she gets more hate than she deserves. She's just a proponent of this ideology. But she goes on this 20-minute lecture about privilege, and she's talking about her shoes and how she confessed that she was going to Jamaica for her vacation to somebody who didn't have the money to go on a vacation this year, and how that was insensitive of her. And I'm just like, if you wanted to teach people how to be charitable and kind and love one another, I mean, don't we have this whole Western tradition that's not dressed up in this newfangled, hateful ideology? Like, if you're just going to make it a Christian college, couldn't you just make it a Christian college and just call it like Black Jesus College or something like that? If you just want to do that, why not do that? Right? And it seems like one of my theories is, and this is borne out better by Mike Nina and James Lindsay and John McWhorter too, is that anti-racism is a religion. And there's the same amount of sanctimoniousness. There's the confessions. It's a hobbled satanic Catholicism with all the original sin and all of the regret and all of the guilt, but zero redemption. Absolutely no. But there's reparations, but no redemption. Right? So it's
there's
satanic.
No factor. There's no grace.
There's no transcendence. There's no grace. Right.
And all the horrible parts, none of the good parts. No wonder we push back against it.
Well, yeah, and if you look at, and this is my test, like, where's your art? Where's your music? Where's the fruits of your labor? If you're gonna show me that this is gonna replace my culture, what are you gonna bring with it? Like, I want the whole deal. I want it all. And so maybe it will permutate out and the toxicity will permutate out. But I was thinking there's some seeds and there's some good ideas. And, they are right in saying that just pretending not to see race actually isn't the full picture. When you look at a human being as an individual, that's where you start. But you also have to see them as an individual through time. And that individual is in time through all these other circumstances. And they have a different experience than you. And I don't know what to do with that knowledge. I wouldn't mess too much with the systems, but I would try to impart. See, we get into the question, well, what do you do with that knowledge? And then you go into evangelicalism. There's some sort of like idea form that starts forming that is basically a religion where I need to go and reform your culture. I'll work on my culture and you work on yours, but we have to have some common values in place. And what are those values? Maybe rights, as you conceive of them, are the core values that if everybody agreed upon, that would do best for everybody.
Well, that's exactly along the right lines. And I'll also contribute more now that I've had a couple seconds to think about what we were just talking about in terms of, what systems or ideas do I have that are so much better. I like our American system. I like the American experiment. And I'll tell you why I like it, because in its purity, it comes down to compromise. This was brought so home to me by Ken Burns, actually. This is where I learned this from. And it was a series of documentaries, including the Civil War documentary, the Congress documentary, the documentaries on how this country, the struggles it went through. and where it broke down and how it broke down and what happened when it broke down, right? Congressmen beating each other with canes, bringing guns into the floor of the Congress to attack one another because they could not compromise. They just couldn't get themselves to see that the other person had anything valid to say. North-South was the basic dichotomy at that time. And they got to a place where it just came to a head, where they couldn't compromise anymore. And as soon as that happened, the Civil War broke out. And it was the single worst thing that's ever happened to this country as far as death and destruction and dying and wholesale slaughter and disease. It sucked. It sucked hard. And I don't think anybody who has a clue what that was like wants to ever experience anything like that on this soil ever again. Which is why this, people who start, hashtagging Civil War and stuff, I just lose my shit over that, because it's people who have no clue what they're talking about.
Well, some of them actually do.
or worse, they do. Okay, or worse, they do. So my point is that there is a system here that we've put in place that allows for and pushes toward and works the grease of our machinery, of our government machinery, is compromised.
Yeah.
And in a country of 330 million people that we've grown to, of every culture on the planet, I mean, I wonder if there's any Australian Aborigines here, but other than that, I'm pretty sure we're pretty well covered in the United States by this massive diversity of cultures and heritages and backgrounds. Whether they came here originally because they wanted to or not, we're now where we're at.
Yeah.
And we can definitely recognize the mistakes of the past. We must recognize the mistakes of the past, because we don't want to repeat them. We want to learn from them. So how do we do that? We compromise. We say, you know what, this and this and this of what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and we can do something with this, because this we can do, and everybody's life will be better as a result of it. But when you demand special compensation, when you demand special rights, when you demand, we've been persecuted and violated and murdered and all the things that have happened, which have been fucking awful. And you look at all that and you go, okay, well, now we're going to pendulum swing all the way over here. That's not a solution. It's just another problem disguised as a solution. And I think that we might possibly have gotten to a place now where maybe we can rise above the basal impulses of tribalism enough to recognize that tolerance and compromise are the actual solutions to just about every problem that's facing us right now.
Yeah.
That's my soapbox speech on that. So,
well, so this is, it might not be the case that your audience will be subjected to these trainings, but a lot of people are going to be subjected to these trainings and are already being subjected to these trainings. And in Seattle, they had the white people go to special training. The Seattle City Council, I believe, had the white people. They called them out on names, and this is what happened at the Evergreen campus. Like, it's segregation all over again.
Right.
And you're going to be subjected to making this.
Be ready for this. Yeah. What should people be ready for when this happens at their office?
You're going to be put into a position of confessing your racism, of accepting the fact that you're racist. And you're going to have to go along with this program, and there might be tools out there. This is the problem. I have been one voice among a handful of voices, probably, a few hundred or maybe a few thousand voices who have been speaking out against this for the last few years. But we didn't get to a place where we had the shiny pamphlet, the 5 steps of defeating anti-racism and actually making your workplace not racist at all, or of figuring out, understanding the racial disparities and moving towards a better future. We don't have those resources. These anti-racist people, they have all the resources in place. It's a checklist, and it's so streamlined that they can, within a month, have a position within your company that's paying somebody $160,000 a year to make these weird little rituals that you do once a year. It's all, the whole system's already in place. It's been tried out in the academy, and now it's moving into the corporate sector, and it's already been rolling out, and they've been trying it. So I don't know going forward what we're going to have to deal with, but I do know it's going to take a huge hit. It's going to take a huge toll on our economic power. It's going to be a big resource sink in our emotional lives, in our interpersonal lives, and ultimately in the end product of whatever we want to create. As YouTube content creators, we will be subject, and we already have been subject, and they've been toying with this, and they will toy with it more, of filters, of selective filters that will squash us from being able to have different conversations that go against this one narrative. The technology's not there. I might sound a little fear-mongering, but I do think that we're on the precipice of a great dark age, in a sense. If we do not reaffirm, find the values that you care most about, and if those are free speech, critical thinking, and human rights, then we need to come together and build materials somehow, and have conversations somehow, and just form a little speakeasy in your community of people who won't drink that Kool-Aid, but will like kind of save that liberalism, liqueur of open discourse, of truth-oriented critical thinking. Like, we need to make alcoves and conclaves that really just continue that tradition. And because if the pendulum swings too far the other way and Trump gets reelected and there's a huge push towards, let's say, the red, and the Republicans take that as a mandate to really push a lot of things that they want, that will cause the blues, the cities, to go even crazier than they are now. If Trump gets reelected, things will get even worse. So we are on the precipice of some very troubling times. So I just really encourage people to go back to basic core values and build communities around those things.
Yeah, good point, man. And true. According to everything I'm seeing and all the red flags I'm aware of. I mean, the confession thing, you read Lifton, now. I mean, that's just straight up. It's just straight up re-education, indoctrination technique.
Yeah.
I was a sinner, but I have seen the light. I mean, this is as old as the hills. This is an old mechanism of controlling people. You guys, I mean, I'm serious. I really hope you guys are getting this and not just looking at a couple white guys and thinking just a couple racists. I really fucking hope you guys are getting this, because everything I lived for 27 years is being brought to bear right now to try to warn you guys that this is not have a happy ending if it keeps going the way it's going. And I don't want to fear-monger either. I hate fear-mongering. I hate it.
We have to be awake, though.
Yeah, but we have to right now.
Yeah.
Because these societal upheaval moments of crisis and anxiety and stress are when crazy things happen. People were freaking out about Trump getting elected. End of the world. I freaked out. I went way overboard on it, and because I saw a narcissist, and I know a narcissist when I see one, and I know what I'm looking at, and I know the behavior patterns, and I knew we were going to have 4 years of disaster, and we pretty much have had 4 years of disaster. Certainly socially we have. And politically there's questionable points, but our international relations scene right now is a disaster because of this guy. And so I knew we were going to have problems. Okay, cool. I really, really hope that we're not going to be faced with the same level of disastrous results as because of what's happening now.
Yeah.
But maybe it's one of those things of like COVID. You overreact in order to save lives.
Yeah.
Then you save the lives and everybody goes, you overreacted. Did we? Did we? Were we really overstating the case?
You know what? The jury hasn't actually come in on that whole little known virus called COVID-19 yet.
Not yet. So we don't know, but I'm just saying, I mean, Fauci is still like, dude, I ain't going to Tulsa. What are you talking about? You gotta be crazy to do that. What? I mean, Trump's not even talking to him anymore, but big surprise there. I doubt they've had very many conversations in the first place. Anyway. Okay, man. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this with me and just kind of sit up here and rave the red flags. And, some people will see the red flags and go, red is for racist. And other people might say, hey, maybe there's actually some valid point there to be made. We're not helped by the fact that this is a difficult conversation.
Oh, no, they take advantage of that. They really take advantage of the uncomfortable. And they even lean into that. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing the work. Literally, that's what Robin DiAngelo says. Right.
Well, Robin DiAngelo is not a good person as far as I know. That's the nicest thing I have to say about her. So, and I've already broken down and deconstructed with you and James, her incredibly stupid ideas. So I'll ad hominem her all day, but I already know why her ideas are bad. We've already engaged with them. So there will be more of that on this channel because I can't just sit and watch this kind of thing go by. I want to do something.
You should. Well, I'll send you the link to Kendi's TED Talk. It's horrendous. It's so bad. Excellent. You should deconstruct it. It's so awful.
That's what I was just thinking about. Maybe I'll have to do something like that because I do approach this from the cultic angle, and I know what I'm talking about when it comes to. Maybe you can call me out for not being a socialist or a sociologist or for being not being a psychologist, but when it comes to cults, I got it nailed, and that is what's going on right now. So, all right. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm sure we will be talking again.